Janet got hungry.
Janet got hungry.
All right, so we are going to continue on with chapter 34. Again, we are not going to finish this section today. We're not going to finish it. So hopefully we'll get through rotifers and mollusca, and mollusca is a big section. So rotifers, you may remember, maybe you don't, but when we did our little pond, virtual pond dip, rotifers were in there, and they were a part of the animal kingdom. And I think I said list the ones that were animals, and that was question number 10. So rotifers are called wheeled animals, and so hopefully by the end of this section you can understand why they're called wheeled animals. So phylum Rotifera. Wow, I'm just gonna calm down, breathe.
Are you recording?
I sure am.
Is this still part of 34.2?
Nope, this is 3.
Oh.
It's the new section.
What was the section's name?
What?
Like, what was the topic? Like, the section topic?
Plateozoans, rotifers. Basically what A says on this slide.
Well, my keyboard.
Okay, so we are dealing with bilateral organisms basically for the rest of this chapter. So they're bilaterally symmetrical, as you can see in this picture here. You can cut it and you get a left and a right hand side. They are unsegmented pseudocoelomates. Okay, so the pseudocoelom is, it's not covered or built within the mesoderm of the germ cell. So with a full coelom, then it is within the mesoderm. So the pseudocoelom acts like a hydrostatic skeleton. And when we get to annelids, I'll talk more in depth of how a hydrostatic skeleton works, but it's like a tube within a tube, and you're basically moving with fluids. They are smaller than some ciliated protists. So like I mentioned earlier with our virtual pond dip, how you guys saw that in that jar. 3 cell layers, highly developed internal organs. I mean, notice we got a stomach here, and a complete gut, okay, mouth all the way down to the anus here. Locomotion and how they gather food. So you'll notice that at the top we have this structure called the corona, and on the corona we have tiny little cilia. And so they propel water by beating the cilia, kind of like boats with oars. And because they're all just on one side, when they beat, it tends to like push them down and around, and so they kind of move in a big, great wheel, if you will. So that's why they're called wheel animals. And then the organ at the tip called the corona helps to kind of gather food, and it sweeps that food into the mouth. It does have a complex jaw built down here, kind of in this mastix area. Most rotifers are freshwater, and their lifespan is between 1 to 2 weeks. So. Okay, so this next slide, I'm just going to show you a real-life picture of one of these wheeled organisms, and then just show you the phylogeny tree of where we're at, and then that's basically it for rotifers. Okay, so again, same diagram, just probably a little bit more vivid. But here's the real life structure. So this corona kind of extends out, but you can definitely see the cilia hairs, if you will. And there we are with Rotifera. So we discussed platyhelminths, which was part of Platyzoa, and then another Platyzoa Rotifera. So we're done with that. I think we're going to move on to the Lophotrochozoas, or Trochozoans, and tackle most of these phylums. Review question: to which phylum do the wheel animals belong to? D. Thank you so much. I would have cried if, yeah. Okay. Boy, that's supposed to be green. Okay, good. It does look green. On my screen, it doesn't look green. So, moving on to Lophotrochozoans, mollusca. Okay, so I'll talk about some defining features of the mollusca, and then talk about the 4 best known groups of mollusks, and that's why the section is so long. And then distinguishing features of cephalopods, and I also want to show you a video about cephalopods if we get to it. So mollusks are extremely diverse and also extremely important to humans. So in the phylums of animals, arthropods would be the top for diversity, and mollusks would be right underneath them. Range from microscopic to huge. The giant squid can be up to 15 meters long. Okay, so 45 feet if I'm doing roughly, yeah, 45 to 50 feet. They evolved in the oceans, and most of them stayed there. There's a class of mollusks that are freshwater and terrestrial, the slugs and the snails. Some examples of mollusks: oysters, clams, scallops, mussels, octopuses. Your book, the plural is used, octopuses is used throughout the book. I've also heard of octopi, but I don't know. So, squids. And the reason why they are pretty important to humans is food source. Tend to eat a lot of these guys. We can also use some of their products for jewelry. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the bivalves. And another important reason to us, and it's kind of a negative one, is that they can be pests. They can cause damage to boats. In Minnesota, zebra mussels are messing up the ecosystem. And we don't really have a predator that eats the zebra mussels, so once it's in that lake, really the only thing we can do is try to extract them, but that's kind of tough to do because there's numerous of them. Slugs and snails can ruin flowers, gardens, crops, and then there are some mollusks that are parasites.
One time when I was at Arrowwood, I actually stepped on a zebra mussel in the lake.
Are you serious? Please tell me you took it and threw it in the fire.
It was so, we threw it in the trees. It was so bad.
Okay, can I move on? Awesome. So, some of the mollusks that we're going to talk about for sure today, we'll talk about class Bivalva, the chitons. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that one. We'll talk about the gastropods and the cephalopods over here. So these 3 are cephalopods. Okay, the body plan is a little bit complex, and it does vary between each class. So they are bilaterally symmetrical. However, the gastropods are not. They're close, but they are not, and I'll explain why. I think it's either the mouth or the anus is just off to the side, so it's not a 100% mirror image when you cut it down. The coelom is also reduced and limited to small spaces, usually around the excretory organs, heart, and part of the intestine. So what I mean by that, the coelom here is in light blue, and you can see that it is small and limited, that opening body cavity, if you will. Okay, internal organs. Digestive, excretory, reproductive organs concentrated in the visceral mass. When you guys dissect your clams, you'll look for the structure, the visceral mass, or this area, I should say. Primary mechanism for movement is a muscular foot. However, in cephalopods, that muscular foot has been divided into either tentacles or arms, which are used for, again, locomotion, but attachment or even food capturing of their prey. Gastropods, in order for them to use their muscular foot on terrestrial land, they tend to secrete mucus and then glide and push themselves on this mucus. Now I like this diagram because it kind of shows you the difference between a tentacle and an arm, because they are not the same thing. I mean, they are similar, but they are not the same. So here we only see two tentacles, and you can see that the end of that is different compared to just an arm. Okay. This is also color coded. You can see that one of the unifying structures of mollusks is a mantle, and so it's colored in yellow here. Some have shells, some of them do not, or they have a reduced internal shell, and so you'll see that when you dissect your squid. And then in orange, here's the foot and how it's been divided into arms or tentacles, and here it's basically the body and it pushes itself through. And then the visceral mass in red. Okay, so we also can definitely distinguish a head at the anterior end of the body. Some other features, the mantle. So thick epidermal sheet of skin covers the dorsal side of the body, tends to form the cavity that houses the circulatory organs. So the circulatory organ / lungs is called the tenidia. And you can kind of see that right here. It's blue, and it looks like a, I don't know, fern leaf or some kind of compound leaf structure. But those are also openings for the excretory as well as the reproductive and digestive systems. So the tenidia almost acts like gills, if you will, filamentous projections rich in blood vessels. You can see that water diffuses or moves through it, and then oxygen will be extracted and sent into the bloodstream or blood vessels. So it's filamentous for a reason. It increases that surface area for gas exchange, and this organ is actually very, very efficient. Extracts 50% more oxygen than like gills and other compared to other respiratory structures. Okay, moving on to shells. So you find it on the outer surface of a mantle, and it's the mantle that secretes compounds to form that shell. Like I mentioned, not all classes of mollusks have shells. So it might be reduced or internal, but the primary function of a shell is obviously for protection. So they will just like withdraw or hide in that shell. But the typical shell anatomy, it's made of calcium carbonate secreted in layers and then covered in a protein called conchin. So you can see that they alternate here, lay down calcium carbonates and then that protein, conchin, calcium carbonate, protein, conchin. So, and then on the inner side of a shell where it looks really, really shiny and pretty is called the Nephrite. So I'll talk a little bit about how pearls form here, but some shellless examples, I guess I should go back. Cuttlefish, squids, octopuses, slugs. Okay, slugs don't have shells, snails do. How pearls form, I'm sure you've heard of how it forms, but like a foreign object, maybe like a grain of sand, gets lodged between the mantle and the inner shell layers. And so the mantle coats that object layer upon layer of nacre, I don't know how to say that exactly, to help reduce the irritation since they can't get it out, since it's like stuck in there. And then as a result, you get pearls. So this pearl is built of layers upon layers of nacre, and what started it all was most likely a grain of sand.
Why does it form like a perfect sphere?
I'm pretty sure that has something to do with maybe location, because you can see over here that these are not, so just depending on where the location of it, maybe it's too close to the shell, so then it got pushed ovule. But if it's like in a perfect spot where it can continue to form layers all the way around it, or maybe the grain of sand or the irritant was a perfect sphere, possibly. Not a perfect, but close, you know, so. All right, feeding and prey capture. So almost all of the mollusks have something called a radula, this raspin tongue-like organ used for feeding. You don't find the radula, however, in bivalves. That's why I bolded it. So this is a microscopic picture, zoomed in, of the radula, and you can see that, yes, it looks raspin, made of many, many microscopic chitinous teeth arranged in rows, if you will. So this cartoon diagram is showing that, obviously a little bit exaggerated, but just showing that, yes, it's raspin, it's jagged. And so they use it to take in their food source, almost kind of like a conveyor belt, if you will. Scrapes it up, brings it in, passes it probably from one microscopic tooth to the other. If the organism is a benthic organism, something that kind of lays low on the bottom of a marine or freshwater ecosystem, it usually just scrapes up the algae. There are some gastropods out there that drill holes through shells of their prey, and some actually have harpoons with venoms. So there are some predator-like creatures out there, but yeah. All right, moving on to removal of waste, or basically the excretory system. So the big word you should probably associate with mollusks is the nephridium. It's a kidney-like organ situated right here in yellow. Okay. And it removes nitrogenous waste. And the tube that connects it to the bladder is the nephrostome, which is not pictured here. moving on to the circulatory system. So I told you that the coelom, the body cavity, is greatly reduced. It's reduced and it's found around certain systems. So the main coelomic cavity is an open circulatory space called the hemosol. And as soon as you're done with the slide, I think I'll go back to the first slide of this picture. I should have pasted it on this slide, but I didn't. But it's called the hemosol. For the mollusks, all of them have an open circulatory system except the cephalopods. Their heart has 3 chambers, 2 that kind of collect blood from the gills and 1 that tries to pump it out to the body tissues. And the blood isn't really called blood, it's called hemolymph. Now the hemosol isn't just like one big open space. It could be several sinuses or several cavities, if you will, with it, each tied into a network of vessels where gas exchange can take place in the gills. So, I'm gonna find that hemosol picture. I want to say it's that one. Okay. Yeah, okay, so here's the hemosol in, looks like light yellow, kind of surrounding it. I think there was a better picture though for some reason. Where did I see it? Nope, that might have been it. Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's coming up. Maybe it's in a different diagram coming up here. Okay, reproduction. There are distinct male and female individuals. There are a few species that are hermaphroditic, but there's not a lot of them. They engage in external fertilization. So both males and females will release their sex cells into the water. They'll mix and fertilization will occur. And then that zygote will undergo spiral cleavage, because we are still within the Spirilia umbrella here, and develop into a structure called a trochophore. This free-swimming larva, that's a repeat vocab term from a previous slide, swims by the use of cilia. And then, this is something that's kind of unique to the mollusks, that trochophore will develop into a second form or second free-swimming stage called the veliger. And then from here, that veliger will form a foot, a shell, a mantle, dependent on whatever type of mollusks or class it's supposed to. Gastropods have internal fertilization, and this is a key adaptation that prevents desiccation, because gastropods are on land, they're terrestrial. So for them to do external fertilization on land would be a bad thing, since the gametes would dry up, die. So they have to do internal fertilization. So the other classes of mollusks practice external, gastropods internal. Some other important features of gastropods that allow them to be able to live on land. So internal fertilization is obviously number one. But then they have a foot that they push along, and they might have to secrete mucus to do that. And then they also have a way more efficient excretory system, where they can reabsorb nutrients and help maintain osmotic balances. So, yeah, go gastropods. All right, the rest of the section here, I'm going to talk about the 4 classes of mollusks. Some of them I won't focus too much on. Some of them I will kind of go a little bit more in depth. Mostly with the cephalopods, because cephalopods are cool. So. All right, so here are the 4 classes of mollusks. There are 7 to 8, but we are just going to zoom in or focus in on 4. The Polyplecophora. Yeah, I'm just going to look up how to say that word because I'm going to have to say it a few more times here. Chitin. Chitin?
Chitin.
Chitin. Oh boy, say that fast. Chitin. Chitins. All right, chitins. Gastropoda, limpet, snails, slugs, and their relatives. We'll talk about the bivalvia or bivalves, clams, oysters, scallops, and their relatives. And then finish it with cephalopods, cephalopodia, squids, octopuses, cuttlefish, and the chambered nautilus. Okay, first up, class Polyplecophoria. So poly means many, and pleco is referring to these calcaneous plates here. And so we see this oval-shaped body with 8 dorsal calcareous plates. So dorsal means back. 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, there they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Even though you look at it from the outside, it looks like it's segmented, but really it's not segmented. Okay, so this is not segmentation going on here. Just looking at the shape of it, I mean, you can kind of tell that it looks like an organism that creeps along the bottom. They have a foot underneath, surrounded by groove or mantle cavity, and like I said, grazing herbivores in shallow, as you can see in this picture right here, marine habitats. According to your book, there's perhaps 1,000 species of chitins.
Would a horseshoe crab be one, or is that different?
Good question. I'm not exactly sure. I want to say horseshoe crabs are decapods.
Oh.
I'll look it up. Horseshoe crab. They are arthropods, so my guess would be yes, they're maybe possibly part of that.
Oh.
They're not true crabs, so they're not decapods. I guess I should say that underneath these plates, they do have repeated gills for each of these little sections, or 8 sets of muscles that help them move. Moving on to class Gastropoda, the snails and the slugs. So most of them have a shell here, but slugs and sea slugs have lost their shell. They creep on the foot. It can be modified for swimming. Another unique thing about snails and slugs is on the head, we do have a pair of tentacles, and usually eyes at the base, at the tops of them. The tentacles usually have a lot of chemosensors or mechanosensors, so chemoreceptors to pick up chemicals, mechanoreceptors, temperature, touch. Class Gastropoda is the only class of mollusks that are not bilaterally symmetrical due to an embryological development called torsion. So what happens is that the anus is kind of off to the side, and it's moved from the posterior location towards the front. And on the next slide, I'll show you where the mouth is and then where the anus is. So they're actually really, really close to each other. So because of torsion and because the movement of the anus, it has like a reduced excretory system, and it's like it's laying on one side more than the other. So if the organs on the inside are not bilateral. So yeah. Don't confuse torsion with coiling. Coiling is just looking at the spiralness of a shell, the spiral winding of the shell. We do see coiling in cephalopods. So I guess I'll hopefully discuss more about that when we get to the cephalopods. And the reason why I put a double asterisk for torsion is it's only found in gastropods. That is what makes that class super unique, is the torsion. Okay, moving on. Oh, nope, I'm going to show you some pictures of the mouth and the anus here. So here you can see the mouth, okay, and then there's the anus right here. So it has been shifted up more, and then they don't really show a good picture of the nephridium. Do you guys see the nephridium anywhere? No, they don't. Okay, not seeing it. But that would be off to the side. So, moving on to the third class Bivalvia, clams, mussels, and cockles. So they're called bivalvia. Bi means two, and then valves is referring to the shells. So we have two lateral left and right shells or valves that are hinged dorsally. When you dissect your clam, the first thing you got to do is try to cut through muscles, tube muscles that keep the shell intact, and then you kind of have to pry it open. So there's a ligament that hinges the shells together, and you're going to have to cut through that. The mantle secretes the shell. So I talked about how shells form, layer of calcium carbonate with that conchin. No distinct head or radula. They do, however, have a wedged-shaped foot that is kind of housed in the center, and it will come out when the bivalves open up, and they use that foot to kind of push and move or to burrow in the sand. You're also going to see that they have two siphons, an inhalant and exhalant siphon, and basically they're like snorkels. So water will move in through the inhalant siphon and circulate through the body. They use it to filter feed and to bring in oxygen, to bring it over the gills, if you will, and then to exhale their waste products, like the CO2 and yeah, then they use the exhalant siphons. Okay, so here's a colored diagram of a clam. You can see that the foot is large. Okay, and so when this is just showing like the bottom shell, we're not seeing the top. So it's like you popped it open and you're just looking at it from the top. So that foot can stick out and push, help it burrow in the sand. The excurrent siphon is here, and there's the incurrent. So water bring in oxygen and food so it can filter feed. It will cycle through and they will extract whatever they need, and then that will be exhaled out through the exhalant. Here they have excurrent, so it should be exhalant siphon. So waste and gametes as well are exited through. And so, yeah, we'll dissect the clam and we'll do our best to find the heart and the aorta. That can be kind of difficult in a clam because when you open it, it just looks like a mess. But there are some organs that you should be able to identify in there. Final class Cephalopoda, the octopuses, squids, and the nautiluses. So they live entirely in the oceans. They are active predators. Their foot has evolved into a series of arms. On the arms you can find suction cups, adhesive structures, or even hooks. And what they do is they use their arms to snare their prey and bring it into their jaw. And this is a picture of the squid jaw here. Strong beak-like. It looks literally like a bird beak. And they'll open and close and kind of rip their food. And then in the mouth, they actually have a tongue-like action of a radula. Cephalopods tend to be extremely intelligent with their highly developed nervous system. They have very complex patterns of behavior. There have been stories of cephalopods climbing out of their tank, moving across a laboratory floor, entering another aquarium to capture, devour a crab, for a midnight snack, and then they will go back to their own tank. And then, the workers are like, hey, what happened to the crab? It just completely disappeared. And they look at the security video and sure enough, it was a squid or a cephalopod. Do you need something?
Yeah, I just have a question.
That's fine.
So you have this test on joints and movement.
Mhm.
It says blanks for read the diagram page with no diagram. Do you know what diagram it was, maybe?
I'll take a look at it during break.
Okay.
So I think the movie is Finding Dory, where they have I don't know if he's a squid or an octopus, but yeah, pretty closely related to the real thing. Make sure you guys know that squids have 10 arms, octopuses have 8 arms, and a nautilus is between 80 and 90. Going back to capturing their prey, I forgot to say because I just thought of this. Their salivary glands actually have toxins to help subdue their prey. So a lot of times that is injected into their prey to subdue them, and then they bring it in. So another unique thing about the cephalopods is that their eyes are actually really elaborate, and they have studied the evolution of eyes, how it has evolved multiple times, but their eyes are better than our eyes. So. Okay. They tend to live in open water, and they are extremely successful in that open water. So as a result, they've kind of lost that external shell because they're active predators. Nautiluses still have their shells, as you can see here in this top panel. Cuttlefish have a reduced shell called the cuttle bone, it's internally. And squid also have an internal shell called the lighter plume. Kind of gives it a little bit of rigidity, but not too much weight. And then octopuses have no external or internal shell. They move through jet propulsion. They take in water through the mantle, expel it out through a siphon. So that's where you get that motion. And then when they do feel threatened, they will eject water violently, shoot themselves through the water, like propel quickly. They can actually move pretty fast. The ink sac will release that ink cloud to confuse their predators, and then they'll make a mad dash away while that predator is confused. Another thing, which I'll show you a video, is that they have these pigments in their epithelium called chromatophores that can change color as well as change texture, so they can actually camouflage in their environment. And this is something that's been discovered within the last decade. And these chromatophores can change very rapidly. And they also think that the chromatophores are used to communicate. Okay, so I'll stop right here. I'll pick it up with this slide and I'll show you that video. I'm just gonna end record because I gotta